always laughed at death until death came for everyone. The village of Kamale lay in a shallow valley, surrounded by jagged fields that looked like the jagged teeth of some sleeping beast. The sun rose like a bleeding orb and fell like molten gold behind the hills, casting long, trembling shadows across the dusty pathways. Life in Kamale moved slowly, measured by the river that wound through it like a silver snake, the songs of the elders, and the rhythm of drums that echoed at every funeral. Yet, amidst the predictable rhythm of life and death, there was one presence that unsettled every villager, one child whose laughter defied the natural order. His name was Kito, and wherever he went, whispers followed. Kito had been born on a night when 3 elders died within hours of each other. The village midwife remembered hearing laughter outside the hut before his first cry, a laugh that was not human, but ancient, a sound carried from worlds beyond. From that moment, villagers noticed he was unlike any other child. While others feared darkness, storms, or the sight of death, Kito seemed drawn to it, almost delighted. The first time the village truly understood the power of his laughter, Kito was 4 years old. Mama Nari, the storyteller who had woven the past into songs and tales for decades, had passed in her sleep. The village gathered beneath the great baobab tree to mourn her, the drums beating slow and low, the wailing of women rising like smoke into the night sky. The air was heavy with grief. Then, piercing the sorrow, came a sound that no one expected, a small, sharp laugh, bright and clear, echoing like a bell through the gathering. The villagers froze. Kito stood near the front, clapping his hands in delight. "He says her feet no longer hurt," Kito said cheerfully, pointing toward the covered body. A cold silence descended. Whispers spread like wildfire, some trembling with fear, others tinged with awe. His mother ran to cover his mouth, but even she could not quiet the child entirely. "What? Who says?" asked Baba Tendo, the village elder, his staff tapping the earth with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Kito's small hand pointed to Mama Nari, as if she was standing before him. "She does," he replied simply. The villagers had no words. Some looked away, some shivered, and yet this was only the beginning. Over the years, the pattern repeated. Whenever someone died, Kito laughed, not a mocking or cruel laugh, but one of understanding, as if he shared a secret with the dead. He spoke of their final thoughts, of places they had hidden treasures, of unfinished business that even the living were unaware of. One day, after the burial of a young fisherman who had drowned in the river, Kito laughed softly, eyes sparkling in the fading sunlight. "He says the silver ring is in the left pocket of his fishing bag," he announced. The fisherman's brother returned home, expecting disappointment. Instead, he found the ring exactly where Kito had said it would be. From that day, some villagers called him touched, others cursed, though the fear remained thick in their hearts. Mothers pulled their children away when he approached. Some would not let him enter their homes. Yet, for all their fear, the village had begun to rely on him, even if they hated to admit it. Kito, for his part, paid them no mind. He wandered among the graves, listening and laughing, always listening. Sometimes he would pause and nod, as if receiving instructions. Sometimes he would scribble strange symbols in the dirt with sticks, symbols no one understood, but he seemed to recognize. And then, one morning, everything changed. The sun struggling to pierce through a thick, ominous haze. A hunter named Sefu died suddenly while tracking a herd of antelope. His body was returned to the village by sunset, carried with care and solemnity. As the villagers assembled under the baobab tree once more, all eyes shifted to Kito. He approached slowly, his dark eyes wide, lips pressed tightly together. Anticipation hung in the air. Would he laugh? Would he speak of Sefu's last thoughts? But nothing happened. The familiar sound, the laughter that had echoed through so many funerals, did not come. Instead, Kito's lips quivered and tears formed in his eyes. The villagers whispered nervously. Some thought it was a trick, a child's act of play-acting grief. But when Kito fell to the ground weeping openly, their unease turned to fear. They are not speaking, he choked out. Babatendo stepped forward, staff in hand. Not speaking? Child, explain yourself, he said, though his voice wavered. Kito shook his head violently. All of them gone silent. The ones who usually talk, they are hiding. A shiver ran through the villagers. From what? Someone asked, their voice trembling. Kito turned slowly toward the dark horizon, his small hands clutching at his chest. From him, he whispered. The word sent a ripple of terror through the assembly. Who is him? Babatendo demanded. Kito's trembling fingers pointed toward the edge of the forest. Death, he breathed. The wind fell silent. The river's faint gurgle seemed to stop. The drums had ceased long ago, leaving only the echo of Kito's voice. Death comes for all, Kito said, his voice low, yet carrying over the crowd. Not one, but many. The villagers looked at one another, disbelief warring with instinctive dread. For generations, death had been part of their lives. But the fear in Kito's eyes was unlike anything they had witnessed. He had never lied. Every message he had delivered, every detail he had spoken, had proven true. Babatendo's face grew pale as he leaned on his staff. How do you know this, child? Kito swallowed, his small chest heaving. Because I see it, he said, staring at a point beyond the living world. He walks the land, tall as the baobab, dark as the endless night. Wherever he steps, the earth grows cold. Wherever he looks, the living fall silent. A cold wind swept through the crowd. Children hid behind their mothers, and even the bravest of men felt a creeping chill climb their spines. Babatendo raised a hand for calm. Then we prepare, he said solemnly. We must seek the guidance of the ancestors. If the boy speaks truth, we will need all the wisdom we can summon. That night, while the village lit protective fires and whispered desperate prayers, Kito sat alone outside his hut, gazing into the horizon. He no longer laughed. He no longer listened. He only cried, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him like a stone. And in the shadows beyond the village, unseen by mortal eyes, a darkness began to stir. A presence so ancient, so patient, that it had watched generations of Kamale rise and fall. And now, it was walking toward the village. The night after Sefu's funeral was restless. Even the firelight seemed to hesitate, flickering as if uncertain of its own existence. Shadows stretched long across the dusty huts of Kamale, creeping into corners where mothers huddled with their children. No one dared speak loudly for fear that the silence itself might shatter. Kito sat at the edge of the village, his knees pulled close to his chest. His body shook, not from the cool night air, but from the weight of what he had seen. The first time in his life, the voices of the dead did not greet him. The secrets, the whispers, the guidance that had always followed him had vanished. And in their absence, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Gentle shadow who guided souls quietly into the night, nor the subtle hand that collected only those ready to depart. This presence was immense, a looming shadow stretching beyond the forest, its steps deliberate, its gaze indiscriminate. Kito had seen glimpses of it before, in nightmares and in fleeting visions, but never so close, so patient, so unstoppable. The boy had never begged, never pleaded, but that night he whispered into the darkness, "Please, not yet." Morning arrived reluctantly, a dull gray bleeding across the horizon. Villagers moved slowly, murmuring among themselves. Mothers adjusted the straps of their children. Men stared at the earth as if it held answers. elders shook their heads in worry. Baba Tendo called a meeting beneath the baobab. His staff tapped the ground with a heavy, insistent rhythm. "Kito," he began, voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. "Tell us what you have seen. Do not fear us, child. Speak as you always do." Kito stood slowly, his small frame quivering. He raised his head and looked directly at the elder, eyes wide and dark, reflecting the fear he had carried through the night. "They are silent," he said, voice cracking. "All of them, the dead I have spoken to, the ones who usually share their secrets, they are hiding. Something, someone is coming." He walks across the land, tall as the sky, dark as the night that swallows the moon. He does not hurry. He comes for many. He comes for us. A hushed murmur ran through the villagers. Some laughed nervously, dismissing the boy's words as childish imagination. But others, the mothers who had felt Kito's insight through past funerals, the elders who remembered the unerring accuracy of his visions, exchanged grim looks. "Walks across the land?" an elder asked quietly. "Child, what do you mean?" Kito's lips trembled. "Not as death usually comes, not to guide a single soul. He comes to gather them all. The balance has been broken, and he will restore it, whether we are ready or not." The villagers shivered. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath as though listening. Baba Tendo placed a hand on Kito's shoulder. "We must prepare," he said solemnly. "If what you say is true, then we must seek the guidance of the ancestors. We must call upon the spirits for protection, for wisdom." Kito shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "They cannot stop him," he whispered. "No one can. He is older than the rivers, older than the hills, older than our lives. He is patient. He is relentless. He waits for none. And soon he will be here." That evening, the villagers gathered around the sacred fire, a circle of trembling bodies and whispered prayers. Baba Tendo sprinkled ash into the flames, chanting in the old tongue, summoning the ancestors to hear them. The fire flared violently, sparks leaping high into the night, dancing like restless spirits. Kito knelt in the center, listening. For hours nothing stirred. Then a faint whisper, barely audible, seemed to rise from the flames. They say he has broken the path," Kito murmured, his voice trembling. "He no longer waits for souls to come to him. He walks to gather them himself." The villagers exchanged anxious glances. "Why?" Baba Tendo asked. "Why now?" Kito tilted his head, listening as if he could hear voices far beyond the firelight. "Because the living cling too tightly to life. Too many refuse the path. He comes to restore the balance." Silence fell, heavy as stone. Some villagers clutched their children. Others pressed their hands to their chests, feeling the rapid beat of fear. "We cannot fight him," Kito continued, tears streaming freely now. "He does not answer prayers. He does not bend for fear. He comes and he takes what must be taken." Throwing long shadows across the circle. The villagers stared at Kito, fear and awe mingling in their eyes. Some wanted to flee immediately. Others argued for staying, insisting that no child's vision could dictate the fate of an entire village. Baba Tendo raised his staff, demanding calm. "We must honor the night," he said. "We will call upon the ancestors, but we will also prepare ourselves. Gather the charms, prepare the herbs. Keep your children close. If death approaches, we must not be caught unready." All through the night, the village remained tense. Kito sat alone beneath the baobab, staring at the dark horizon where the forest met the valley. The wind whispered around him, carrying no familiar voices, no comforting murmurs of those who had passed, only silence. And then, from the direction of the hills. He thought he heard it, a soft, deliberate step. Not the step of a man or an animal, but a presence so vast it made the ground tremble slightly. His breath caught in his throat. "They are coming," he whispered to the night, his small hands shaking. "They are finally coming." By dawn, no one had slept. Whispers of fear spread throughout Kamale like fire through dry grass. Mothers refused to leave the huts. The men carried sticks and axes, though they knew in their hearts they would not help. Even Baba Tendo, usually unshakable, seemed drained, eyes red from hours of chanting and sleepless vigilance. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the river and the hills, a darkness moved. A patient darkness that did not need to run, did not need to hide. A darkness that would not stop. Kito's tears had not ceased, but now they were mixed with a new emotion, resolute. Whatever came, he would see it. Whatever approached, he would not turn away. He had laughed at death his entire life. Now he would confront it. By the third night after Sefu's funeral, Kamale had changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. Children no longer laughed as they ran across the dusty paths. Goats and chickens wandered aimlessly, their movement sluggish, as if sensing the tension in the air. Even the river, which had sang songs to the village for generations, seemed muted, its waters whispering faintly against the banks, carrying a sense of unease. Kito walked among the villagers, his small dark figure moving with a strange purpose. He no longer laughed, he no longer spoke freely. He listened, and in the silence he could hear them, the ancestors, whispering faintly, warning him. "They are restless," he murmured to himself, tracing a circle in the dirt with a stick. "They warn me, but they cannot stop him." The villagers noticed his changed behavior. Mothers glanced anxiously at their children, fearing what the boy might foresee next. Elders gathered in hushed councils, their voices barely rising above the wind, debating whether they should flee or stay, whether the child's prophecy was an omen of doom or madness. Baba Tendo, the village elder, called another meeting under the great baobab tree. The night was thick with mist, curling around the massive trunk like fingers of smoke. Kito arrived first, kneeling silently at the center of the circle the elders had formed. "Child," Baba Tendo said gently, "tell us what the ancestors reveal." Kito lifted his head slowly, eyes dark and wide with fear. They whisper of a shadow older than the hills, taller than the tallest tree. It walks across the earth and it will not stop until balance is restored. It comes not for one, but for many. It comes for Kamale. A murmur of terror ran through the gathered villagers. Some clutched their children to their chests, others held tightly to staffs or knives, their knuckles white. Baba Tendo swallowed, his voice steady but low. "And what do the ancestors advise?" Kito shivered. "They say flee or prepare. Some will listen and survive, others will not. But the child who laughs at funerals can do nothing to change it. Not even the ancestors can
heavy
stop
and
him."
suffocating. The wind, which had whispered faintly through the village, died completely. Even the river's gentle murmur seemed to halt, as if the entire world had paused to listen. One of the younger men, Nuru, broke the silence. "How can we flee? There's nowhere to run. The shadow walks the land. It sees us. It knows us. It will find us no matter where we hide." Kito's lips trembled. "Then we prepare," he whispered. "We call the ancestors. We light the fires. We gather charms and herbs. But we must not sleep. Not tonight. Not until he comes." The villagers set to work. They gathered sacred herbs and powders, whispered protective incantations, and formed circles of fire around the huts. Women placed talismans in doorways. Children were kept indoors, trembling against their mothers' chests. Even the hunters, who had once mocked Kito's visions, now ran to gather firewood and strengthen the village defenses. All the while, Kito sat at the edge of the village, staring into the darkness beyond the hills. He could feel the presence drawing closer, each step measured, deliberate. It was not in a hurry. It did not need to be. The shadow had time, and it had patience older than memory itself. Around midnight, the whispers grew louder. Kito heard them clearly for the first time. The ancestors speaking through the wind, through the crackling of the sacred fire, through the rustle of leaves. They warn, he murmured, shivering. They warn that if we are not vigilant, many will be taken before the first light. They say some will be spared, but only those who act with courage, not fear. The villagers strained to hear, but no one else could perceive the whispers. Only Kito, the boy who had laughed at death, could hear them. Baba Tendo approached him cautiously. "Child, are you certain of what you hear?" Kito's dark eyes met his. "I am certain, and we have little time. The shadow grows closer. Soon it will be at the river, at the edge of our field. Soon it will be here." Panic began to ripple through the villagers. Some argued to flee immediately. Others insisted on staying, on defending their homes with fire and prayer. The debate grew heated, voices rising, threatening to spill over into chaos. Then Kito stood. He raised his small arms, and the crowd fell silent instantly. His voice, though small, carried an authority no one could deny. "Listen," he cried. "I have laughed at death my whole life. I have spoken with the dead, and I have known their secrets. But this is not the ordinary passing of souls. He is coming to restore balance. He does not hesitate. He does not forgive. He comes for many, not one. And if you are not ready, you will be lost." The villagers stared, some in disbelief, some in fear, some in dawning understanding. The weight of his words pressed down upon them like the thick mist that blanketed the valley. Baba Tendo stepped forward. "Then we have a choice," he said gravely. "We can flee, leaving behind our homes, our land, our lives as we know them. Or we can stay, prepare, and face what comes. But understand this, if we stay, we do so at our own peril." Kito's eyes glimmered with tears, but also determination. "I will not run. I will face it as I have faced every death before, and I will guide those who are brave enough to listen." The villagers looked at each other. Some nodded, steeling themselves. Others shivered, wishing for the comfort of ignorance that would no longer come. As midnight deepened, the first signs appeared. The forest edge seemed darker than before, the shadows moving unnaturally. The wind shifted, carrying a cold that was not from the night air, but from somewhere beyond the world of the living. Kito knelt beside the sacred fire, whispering to the ancestors, asking for protection, guidance, and
the villagers listened, strained, their hearts pounding with fear. Then, from beyond the hills, they heard it, a sound unlike any other. Not the roar of a beast, not the creaking of trees, not the whisper of wind, but a slow, deliberate movement. The ground seemed to vibrate faintly beneath their feet, as if acknowledging the presence that approached. Kito's lips trembled. "It is coming," he whispered. "Closer, and we have little time." The fire flared once more, and for a fleeting moment, the flames seemed to twist into shapes, faces, hands, figures of those long dead, flickering with messages of warning and urgency. Kito listened carefully, interpreting each whisper, each shadow, each fleeting shape. The ancestors had spoken. The villagers would have to act, and they would have to act now. In the village of Kamale, a storm of fear, determination, and ancient power began to rise, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the shadow moved closer, patient, inevitable, unstoppable. The boy who had always laughed at funerals now stood on the edge of history, the boundary between the living and the dead, knowing that the fate of his village rested on his courage, his vision, and the choices of those who would follow him. The seventh night fell over Kamale like a black curtain, heavy and suffocating. Even the wind, which had whispered and carried messages from the ancestors in previous nights, fell completely silent. The river's murmur ceased, leaving only an oppressive, unnatural stillness.
The village itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew that something older and darker than memory had come to walk among them. Kito stood in the center of the village, the flickering firelight painting his small figure in shades of gold and shadow. His dark eyes scanned the horizon beyond the fields, toward the edge of the forest where he had first seen the approaching darkness. Tonight, the air felt thick, as though every particle was aware of what was coming. He could feel it, not the usual rustle of unseen spirits, not the whispers of ancestors, but the presence of something immense, patient, and unyielding. The villagers gathered hesitantly behind him, clutching their children, weapons, charms, anything that might offer protection. Fear was thick in their chests, but some sense of hope remained. Kito had always guided them before. If anyone could help them face what was coming, it was him. Then, far off beyond the fields, it began to move. At first, it was just a shadow, darker than the darkest night, taller than any tree, stretching impossibly into the sky. The wind stirred suddenly, carrying no scent of earth or vegetation, only a chill that gripped the heart. It did not hurry. It did not walk, it glided with deliberate purpose, each step measured and slow, and with each step the ground beneath it seemed to darken as if swallowing itself. Kito's lips trembled. "It is here," he whispered, barely audible over the tense hush of the villagers. Some of the men raised their staffs, knives and axes. Others fell to their knees, covering their children with trembling arms. Mothers whispered desperate prayers to the ancestors, some crossing themselves, some singing the sacred chants they had learned in secret. Kito did not move. His tears flowed freely now, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a grim resolve. "Do not run," he told the villagers softly. "Running will not save you. Only courage and listening may." The shadow reached the edge of the village. Darkness seemed to ripple around it, folding the night in layers of black. Even the flames of the protective fire flickered uncertainly, as if intimidated by the presence. It paused for a moment, surveying the village, and Kito felt its gaze as if it were a weight pressing against his chest. Then
That traveled
it
through
spoke.
air, but with a presence that filled every mind, every heart. The villagers felt the command, the inevitability of its voice. "I am here," it said. "I come for balance." A collective shiver ran through Kamale. Even the strongest warriors dropped their weapons, some on trembling knees, others clutching their children. The shadow did not move forward. It waited. And in its waiting, it demanded understanding, obedience, and fear. Kito stepped forward, small but unyielding. "You cannot take what is not yet ready," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but the shadow seemed to acknowledge it, tilting slightly as if listening. "You speak as one who hears the living and the dead," the shadow replied. "Child who laughs at funerals, you know the balance. You have seen the secrets of those who passed. Tell me, what must be spared?" Kito swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of every soul in the village pressing against his heart. He could see them, old and young, sick and healthy, all trembling beneath the shadow's immense gaze. His hands clenched into fists. "They are afraid," Kito said softly. "Some are unready. Some cling to the living. But many, many will be lost if you take without mercy." The shadow did not move, but the air seemed to grow heavier. "Balance is demanded," it said. "I do not act with cruelty. I act with necessity. Lives must be claimed. Choices must be faced. And yet, you, child, you offer me guidance." Kito nodded slowly. "I offer truth," he said. "Not mercy, not escape. Truth. They will follow me if they have courage. If they do not, they will be taken, and rightly so." The villagers looked at him, some with hope, some with horror. They understood, for the first time fully, that Kito was their only bridge, their only intermediary.
Fear pressed at their hearts, but so did trust, fragile and tentative. The shadow stepped forward slowly, folding the night around itself. It moved through the fields, and wherever it passed, the grass blackened, the earth cooled, and the air felt thick with inevitability. Kito's voice rose, carrying through the village. "Listen to me," he shouted. "Do not fight with fear. Do not hide. Stand and acknowledge what comes. Only then may you endure." Some obeyed, some faltered, some collapsed. The shadow's presence was overwhelming, but Kito remained steadfast. He had laughed at death his entire life, had listened to the secrets of those who had passed, and now he faced the one entity even he had never dared confront. For what felt like hours, the shadow surveyed the village, its presence bending reality around it. And then, slowly, it moved. It passed over the huts, the sacred fire, the fields, touching nothing, yet touching everything. The villagers felt their hearts sink, felt the inevitable, yet could not move. When the shadow reached the center of Kamale, it halted before Kito. The child's small body trembled, tears streaming, but his gaze did not falter. "Child who laughs at funerals, will you guide them? Will you show the living the way?" Kito nodded, whispering, "I will. I always have." The shadow shifted, bending the night around it like a tide. Then, in a movement both terrifying and beautiful, it began to retreat slowly toward the horizon. Its purpose was not cruelty, it was balance. It had come to mark, to observe, to collect what must be collected. And as it faded beyond the hills,
The shadow
Kito realized
had not taken
something
anyone.
profound.
Not yet. But it had shown them the truth, that death is inevitable, that fear is not always the enemy, and that courage and awareness could offer some measure of mercy in the face of the unstoppable. By the first light of dawn, the villagers of Kamale were silent. They gathered around Kito, their eyes filled with awe and fear. Mothers pressed children close. Men knelt upon the ground, unsteady, shaken by the night's events. Babatendo placed a hand upon Kito's shoulder, his voice low and reverent. "Child, you have guided us through what none could have imagined. You have faced the shadow and survived. You are the bridge between the living and the dead. Never forget your strength, nor the weight you bear." Kito nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his small body. He had laughed at funerals all his life, and now he had seen death itself. He had cried, feared, and faced the unimaginable. But more importantly, he had learned the true power of balance and courage. As the village began to stir, preparing for the day ahead, Kito looked toward the horizon. Somewhere, far beyond the hills, the shadow moved on, patient and eternal. But tonight, Kamale had survived. And Kito, the boy who had always laughed at death, had finally understood the depth of his own role in the tapestry of life and death. The village of Kamale awoke under a strange dawn. The air was heavy with the lingering presence of what had passed through the night, the shadow, the immense being that had come and gone with the patience of eternity. The villagers moved cautiously, their hearts still pounding from the encounter, but their fear was now tempered by understanding. Kito stood at the edge of the central square, the fire's embers casting a trembling light across his small face. He had not slept, nor had he stopped listening. The whispers of the ancestors, faint but persistent, guided him, teaching him how to navigate the peril that had nearly consumed them. Babatendo approached, his staff tapping slowly against the earth. "Child," he said, voice low and reverent, "you have faced what no mortal has seen. You have guided us through the night. Tell us, is it over?" Kito shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, his voice soft but carrying the weight of certainty. "It will return. It always does. Death does not act in haste. It waits for the moment when balance is broken again." The villagers listened, their fear returning with a vengeance, but Kito continued. "Tonight you have been spared. Some of you have the courage to survive because you faced it with open eyes.
but not all will be so lucky. The shadow comes not for cruelty, but for necessity, and the necessity will come again. A hush fell. Mothers held children close. The hunters tightened their grips on knives and axes. Some villagers sank to their knees, trembling, while others stared blankly at the distant hills, feeling the cold shadow's presence linger in their bones. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the village. Not a footstep, nor a voice, but a presence. The air shifted, thickened, and the shadow returned. Taller, darker, more immense than ever, it moved across the fields toward the village, deliberate and inevitable. Kito stepped forward, his small frame standing firm despite the overwhelming presence. He could feel every heartbeat of every villager. He could feel the shadow's gaze, infinite and patient as it
the
swept
shadow
over
said,
Kamale.
its voice both everywhere and nowhere, filling minds, hearts, and the air itself. Child who laughs at funerals, you have guided them. You have shown them courage. Now you must guide them further. Will they follow your words? Kito's voice rose, trembling but unwavering. They will follow me, he said. They will listen if they have the strength, but they must make a choice, leave or stay and face what is coming. Only the brave survive. A low murmur ran through the villagers. Some clutched their children, terrified at the idea of fleeing. Others shook with determination, choosing to stay, to face the unknown rather than abandon their homes. The decision lay heavy upon every heart. The shadow extended a massive, almost imperceptible hand toward Kito. Child, you speak of courage, but what of sacrifice? Will you offer yourself so that others may endure? Kito's small body trembled. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his gaze never wavered. I will guide them, he said softly. But if balance demands, then I will be the first to offer myself. I have laughed at death my whole life. Now I must face it willingly. The shadow paused, folding the night around itself, as if acknowledging his bravery. You understand, the living cannot cling forever. Balance demands a price. Some must be taken, some may remain. The choice is not yours alone, but you can offer the guidance to those who are brave enough to listen. A hush fell over the village. Mothers whispered to children, fathers gripped hands, elders prayed silently, and the fire's embers flickered in anxious anticipation. The villagers faced the ultimate test of courage. Would they flee or would they stay and accept the inevitable? Kito's eyes scanned the crowd, resting on each familiar face. He whispered softly, but all could hear. Fear is natural, but courage is choice. You must decide now before the shadow comes closer. Some villagers ran toward the hills, seeking to escape. Others sank to the ground in fear. But a group, those who had stood with him through nights of whispers and shadows, remained, listening, trusting in the guidance of the boy who had always laughed at funerals. The shadow moved slowly through the village, its presence overwhelming. Wherever it passed, the ground darkened and a cold silence followed. But it did not take the villagers who had chosen courage. It paused before Kito, folding the night around him like a cloak. You, child, the shadow said, have understood the truth. You have not laughed nor cried in vain. You have faced the impossible. Balance has been acknowledged tonight because of your courage. Kito bowed his head, exhausted, tears falling freely. I have only done what I must, he whispered. The shadow extended a massive, invisible hand, and a wave of presence passed through the village. It was neither destructive nor cruel, yet everyone felt it deep in their bones. Some of the faint-hearted, those who had hesitated, those who had clung to fear rather than choice, crumpled, taken by the shadow.
Their souls, the villagers realized with horror, were claimed, not in malice, but
Stood
because
firm,
balance
guiding
demanded
the
it.
remaining villagers through the night. He whispered to them, teaching them to breathe through fear, to move with courage, to face the inevitable with awareness rather than panic. The shadow lingered until the first light of dawn, then slowly receded toward the hills. Its presence remained in the air, subtle but persistent, reminding Kamale that the world of the living and the dead is connected, that balance is never permanent, and that courage is the only shield against inevitability. When the sun finally rose, the village was quiet but alive. Those who had chosen courage, those who had listened to Kito, stood together, shaken but unbroken. Baba Tendo approached the boy, placing a hand upon his shoulder. "Child," he said, voice thick with awe and reverence, "you have guided us through what none could imagine. You have seen death itself and you have endured. You are more than a child who laughs at funerals. You are a bridge, a protector, a witness. Never forget the strength you carry." Kito nodded, exhaustion etched into every line of his small body. He had laughed at death his entire life. He had spoken with the dead, and now he had faced death itself. And for the first time, he understood. Courage, choice, and awareness could tip the scales even when faced with inevitability. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the shadow moved on, patient, eternal, unstoppable, but Kamali had survived. The villagers would never forget the night the shadow came, and Kito, the boy who laughed at funerals, had finally understood the depth of his own role, not to defy death, but to guide the living through it. In the years to come, mothers would tell their children of the boy who laughed at funerals, of the shadow that came for balance, and of the courage that allowed Kamale to endure. And sometimes, on the edge of the fields at night, faint laughter could still be heard, soft, reassuring, carrying the lessons of bravery, balance, and the inevitability of life and death.